A child's desperate plea, a mother's last hope, and a rancher's life forever changed. What happens when a chance encounter in a dusty frontier town turns into the beginning of something no one expected? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. Sarah Whitehawk stood at the edge of town, her feet dusty and her face weathered from days of walking. The Arizona Territory of 1885 had been unkind to her and her 5-year-old son, Little Wolf. Her Apache heritage was visible in her copper skin and high cheekbones, making her an outcast in most places they traveled. "Mama, I'm thirsty," Little Wolf whispered, his small hand tugging at her worn dress. "I know, my son. We'll find water soon." She squeezed his hand reassuringly, while scanning the small frontier town of Pinewood. They'd been traveling for days since being forced to leave the last settlement. Sarah's husband, a white settler named Thomas, had abandoned them 2 years ago, leaving them vulnerable in a world that showed little kindness to a mixed-blood child and his Apache mother. The main street was lined with the usual establishments, a general store, saloon, and small businesses that comprised frontier towns. What caught Sarah's eye was a "Help Wanted" sign in the window of the general store. Hope flickered within her chest. "Come, Little Wolf. Perhaps the spirits have finally shown us favor." Inside the store, a bell jingled as they entered. The shopkeeper, a portly man with spectacles, looked up from his ledger. His welcoming smile faltered when he saw them. "Can I help you?" His tone was cool, eyes darting between Sarah and her son. "I saw your sign. I'm looking for work, sir." "Work? Well," he cleared his throat, "the position isn't suitable for someone like yourself." The familiar sting of rejection washed over Sarah. "I can clean, cook, sew. I'm strong and honest." "I'm sure you are, but the customers, they have expectations." He adjusted his spectacles nervously. "We're a respectable establishment." Little Wolf clung tighter to his mother's skirt, sensing her distress. Sarah stood tall, preserving what dignity she could. "I understand. Thank you for your time." Outside, Sarah's composure began to crack. 3 rejections in one day, and the sun was already beginning its descent. They needed shelter and food. "Mama, look!" Little Wolf pointed toward the edge of town where a rider was approaching. The man rode a chestnut stallion, his broad shoulders and confident posture marking him as someone of importance. As he passed, his eyes met Sarah's briefly. There was no hostility in his gaze, just curiosity. Sarah watched as he dismounted outside the sheriff's office. His clothing was practical but well-made. A rancher, perhaps. Someone with work that needed doing. "Wait here, Little Wolf." Sarah knelt beside her son. "Don't move from this spot." She approached the man as he was tying his horse to the hitching post. "Excuse me, sir. I'm looking for work. Any kind of work." The man turned, surprise evident on his weathered face. He was older than she'd first thought, maybe mid-40s, with streaks of gray in his dark hair and deep lines around his eyes that suggested both laughter and hardship. "Work?" He studied her openly. "What kind of work do you do, ma'am?" "Anything, sir. I cook, clean, tend gardens. I'm strong and quick to learn." The man, James Cooper, though she didn't know his name yet, removed his hat, revealing more of that salt and pepper hair. "I'm afraid I don't have much need for house help. My ranch is a modest operation." Sarah's heart sank, but she persisted. "Perhaps you need help with laundry or mending. I'm very skilled with a needle." Before he could answer, Little Wolf appeared at Sarah's side, having disobeyed her instruction to stay put. "Mama," he whispered urgently. "The man in the store told another man to watch us. He said we're trouble." James's eyebrows rose as he looked at the child. Little Wolf met his gaze directly, showing a courage that belied his years. "Your boy speaks well for his age," James remarked. "He's bright," Sarah said, a note of pride breaking through her desperation. "And he's hungry. We both are." Something shifted in James's expression. He looked down the street, where indeed, the shopkeeper was watching them with suspicious eyes. "How long since you've eaten properly?" 2 days, sir." James nodded slowly, making a decision. "My ranch is 5 miles outside town. I could use someone to help with the cooking and perhaps some mending." He paused. "It's not charity. The work is real, and I pay fair wages." Sarah felt tears threatening. Thank you, sir. We won't disappoint you. I'm James Cooper. He offered his hand, a gesture rarely extended to someone of her background. Sarah Whitehawk. She took his hand briefly. And this is my son, Little Wolf. James nodded to the boy. Well, Little Wolf, think you can ride a horse? The boy's eyes widened. Yes, sir. Good. Let me finish my business with the sheriff, then we'll head to the ranch before nightfall. As James disappeared into the sheriff's office, Sarah knelt beside her son. Remember this day, Little Wolf. Sometimes the spirits bring help when we need it most. The boy nodded solemnly, his young face already showing wisdom beyond his years. Will we have a home now, Mama? Sarah looked toward the sheriff's office where their potential savior had disappeared. Perhaps, my son. Perhaps. The Cooper Ranch emerged from the landscape as they crested a hill, a modest but well-maintained homestead with a main house, barn, and several outbuildings spread across the valley. The setting sun cast long shadows across the property, painting everything in warm, golden hues. Sarah sat behind James on his horse with Little Wolf nestled between them. The boy had remained wide-eyed throughout the journey, occasionally pointing at jackrabbits or hawks that crossed their path. It's not much, James said as they approached, but it's peaceful. It's beautiful, Sarah replied honestly, taking in the sweeping vista of mountains in the distance. As they dismounted in front of the main house, a border collie came bounding around the corner, barking excitedly. That's Scout, James explained as the dog circled them, sniffing the newcomers with interest. Best cattle dog in the territory. Little Wolf giggled as Scout licked his hand, perhaps the first genuine laugh Sarah had heard from him in weeks. The main house was simple but solid, a two-story structure built of local timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Inside, Sarah was surprised by the cleanliness but noted the distinct lack of feminine touches. No curtains adorned the windows, and the furniture, while sturdy, was purely functional. My wife, Eleanor, passed 5 years ago, James explained, noticing Sarah's assessment. Fever took her. Never got around to replacing the curtains she was planning to hang. I'm sorry for your loss, Sarah said softly. James nodded, the grief still evident in his eyes despite the years. Kitchen's through there. You'll find it well stocked but underused. I've been making do with simple fare. He showed them to a small room off the kitchen with a single bed. It's not much, but it's private. There's a cot in the storage room I can bring in for the boy. This is more than generous, Sarah assured him, overwhelmed by his kindness. After James left them to settle in, Sarah sat on the bed beside Little Wolf, the reality of their situation sinking in. Remember, my son, we must work hard to earn our place here. Mr. Cooper has shown us kindness, but this is not our home. Little Wolf nodded solemnly. I'll be good, Mama. I promise. Sarah smoothed his hair. I know you will. That evening, Sarah prepared a simple but hearty stew from the ingredients in James's pantry. The kitchen was well equipped, suggesting that Eleanor Cooper had once taken pride in her cooking. When James entered for dinner, he stopped in the doorway, a strange expression crossing his face. Something wrong, Mr. Cooper? Sarah asked, suddenly worried. No, it's been a long time since this house smelled of proper cooking. He cleared his throat. Smells good. They ate at the kitchen table, an awkward silence hanging between the adults while Little Wolf chattered about the dog and the horses he'd spotted in the corral. Do you have any children, Mr. Cooper? Sarah asked finally. A shadow crossed his face. A son. He's back east now, working in Boston, banking of all things. There was a note of disappointment in his voice. Haven't seen him in 3 years. I'm sorry. James shrugged. His choice. Never took to ranch life like I hoped. After dinner, Sarah insisted on cleaning up while James showed Little Wolf how to feed Scout. Through the window, she watched the tall rancher kneeling beside her son, demonstrating how to measure the dog's food. Little Wolf was hanging on every word, his face animated with interest. The sight caused an unexpected ache in Sarah's heart. Thomas had never shown such patience with their son. Later, as Sarah tucked Little Wolf into the cot James had set up, the boy asked, Do you think Mr. Cooper will let us stay forever, Mama? Sarah smoothed his blanket. This is just temporary, Little Wolf, until we can make our own way. But I like it here, and Mr. Cooper needs help. Yes, he does, Sarah admitted. But people in town, they won't like that we're here. Because I'm half Apache? Sarah's heart constricted at his direct question. Because people fear what they don't understand. But you must never be ashamed of who you are. You carry the blood of proud people in your veins. And Papa's blood, too. Sarah hesitated. Yes, your father's, too. Will he find us here? No, my son, he won't. The relief in her voice was evident, even to her young son. Thomas Warren had been charming when he'd courted her, promising to bridge their different worlds. But after Little Wolf's birth, his true nature emerged, cruel, resentful of their child's mixed heritage, and eventually abandoning them both. The next morning, Sarah rose before dawn, determined to prove her worth. She had breakfast waiting when James came in from his early chores, the scent of coffee and frying bacon filling the kitchen. You didn't have to start so early, James said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. I wanted to, Sarah replied simply. James studied her for a moment, then nodded. Well, I appreciate it. Been a while since I had a proper breakfast. As they settled into a routine over the following days, Sarah noticed James watching Little Wolf with increasing interest. The boy followed the rancher around eagerly, asking questions about the cattle, the horses, and the operations of the ranch. One evening, after Little Wolf had gone to bed, James approached Sarah as she mended one of his shirts on the porch. Your boy has a natural way with animals. Scout usually doesn't take to strangers, but he follows that child everywhere. Sarah smiled. Little Wolf has always been good with creatures. Even on the reservation, the elders said he had a special gift. James leaned against the porch railing. You were raised on a reservation. Until I was 16. Then I met Thomas, Little Wolf's father. Her expression darkened. He promised me a different life. And instead? Sarah's hand stilled on her mending. Instead, he grew ashamed of us both. When Little Wolf was 3, he left, said he couldn't stand the way people looked at him for having an Indian wife and a half-breed son. James's jaw tightened. Some men don't deserve the title. No, Sarah agreed softly. They don't. They sat in companionable silence as darkness settled over the ranch. For the first time in years, Sarah felt something close to peace. You know, James said finally, I could use some help with the spring roundup next week. Got a neighbor bringing some hands, but we'll be short. Your boy could watch the camp while we work. Sarah looked up, surprised. You'd trust him with that responsibility? He's young, but he's capable. And it would be good for him to feel useful. The consideration in his voice touched Sarah deeply. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. James, he corrected. Think it's time you called me James. Under the starlit sky, with the distant howl of coyotes on the wind, something shifted between them, a tentative trust beginning to form. Fragile, but real. The spring roundup brought a flurry of activity to the Cooper ranch. Sarah rose well before dawn to prepare meals for the cowhands who would be working from sunup to sundown. Little Wolf was beside himself with excitement, having been entrusted with keeping the campfire going and helping serve the men during their brief breaks. Remember to stay back from the cattle, Sarah cautioned as she packed food into saddlebags. And mind what Mr. Cooper James tells you. I will, Mama. Little Wolf was practically bouncing with anticipation, dressed in the small pair of work pants James had found for him in town. Sarah noticed James watching them from the doorway, a thoughtful expression on his weathered face. He'll be fine, James assured her. I'll keep an eye on him. They rode out as the first hint of dawn colored the eastern sky. 3 neighboring ranchers and their hands joined them on the range, bringing the total to 15 men, working to round up cattle scattered across the valleys and draws of James's property. Sarah found herself assigned to the chuck wagon, working alongside Hank, an elderly ranch hand who'd been with James for over a decade. Boss seems different lately, Hank remarked as they set up the midday meal. Ain't seen him this lively in years. Sarah kept her eyes on her work. He's been very kind to us. Hank gave her a knowing look. Kindness ain't all of it, I reckon. Before Sarah could respond, riders approached, dust billowing behind them. At the front rode James, with Little Wolf perched proudly in front of him on the saddle. This boy's got a keen eye, James announced to the gathered men. Spotted a group of strays up in the north draw that we'd have missed completely. Little Wolf beamed under the praise, his small chest puffing out. As the men dismounted for their meal, Sarah noticed the curious glances directed their way. Most were merely interested, but one man, a rancher named Dawson from the next property, watched them with undisguised disapproval. "Didn't know you were hiring Indians now, Cooper," Dawson remarked loudly enough for everyone to hear. A tense silence fell over the group. Sarah felt her cheeks burn but kept her eyes on her work. James's voice cut through the silence, calm but edged with steel. "Mrs. Whitehawk and her son are guests on my property, Dawson. I expect them to be treated with respect." Dawson snorted. "Guests, is it? That what we're calling it?" Several of the men shifted uncomfortably. Little Wolf pressed closer to Sarah's side, his earlier confidence dimming. James stepped forward, his tall frame imposing. "You got something to say. Say it plain. Just thinking of your reputation, Cooper. Town's already talking. Let them talk." James's voice was dangerously quiet. "My business is my own." The standoff continued for a moment before Dawson shrugged and turned away. "Your funeral." The meal continued with strained conversation, but Sarah noticed how several of the other men made a point of complimenting her cooking and thanking Little Wolf for bringing them coffee. As the riders prepared to head back out, James approached Sarah. "I'm sorry about Dawson. He's always been a narrow-minded fool." "It's nothing I'm not used to," Sarah replied, though the hurt was evident in her voice. James studied her face. "Well, you shouldn't be used to it. Not on my land." That evening, after the other men had departed for their own ranches, James found Sarah on the porch, staring out at the darkening landscape. "Little Wolf did well today," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "Has a natural instinct for the work. He admires you," Sarah said softly. "He's never had a man to look up to before." James was quiet for a moment. "My own son, David, never took to ranching. Always had his nose in books, dreaming of city life." A note of regret colored his voice. "I pushed too hard, I think. Wanted him to love this land the way I do. And now he's in Boston. Yes, writing me twice a year with stilted letters about banking and society functions." James sighed. "I'm proud of him, don't misunderstand. Just wish things had been different between us." Sarah hesitated, then said, "Perhaps it's not too late. You could write to him, visit even." "Maybe someday." James turned to her. "What about Little Wolf's father? Any chance of reconciliation there?" Sarah's expression hardened. "Thomas made his choice. Even if he returned, I wouldn't allow him near my son again. Not after what he did." "Which was?" Sarah stared into the gathering darkness. "When he left, he told Little Wolf that he wasn't a real Warren, that he was just an Indian brat he'd been saddled with." Her voice caught. "My son was 3 years old." James's hands gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles white with anger. "No child deserves that." "No," Sarah agreed quietly. "They don't." The following days brought a rhythm to their lives on the ranch. Sarah kept the house in order and prepared meals, while Little Wolf eagerly helped with chores around the property. James began teaching the boy to ride properly on an old, gentle mare, and Sarah often watched them from the kitchen window, her heart both full and fearful. "Don't get too attached," she warned herself. "This isn't permanent." But as weeks turned into a month, the boundaries began to blur. Little Wolf called out excitedly for James whenever the rancher returned from town. James brought back small gifts: a wooden toy horse, a book of simple stories, a new shirt that actually fit the growing boy. One evening, after Little Wolf had gone to bed, James joined Sarah on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Little Wolf needs schooling." Sarah nodded. "I've taught him what I can, but yes, he should attend school eventually. Pinewood has a decent school. Term starts in September." Sarah turned to him, surprised. "You're suggesting he attend in town?" "James, they wouldn't accept him." "They would if he were my ward." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah's heart raced as she tried to understand his meaning. "Your ward?" James set his coffee cup down and turned to face her directly. "Sarah, I'm not a man who speaks around things. I've grown fond of you both. More than fond." He cleared his throat. "I'm proposing an arrangement, a marriage if you're willing. It would give Little Wolf my name, protection, a future." Sarah's breath caught. "A marriage of convenience?" Something flickered in James's eyes. "It started that way in my thinking, yes, but I find my feelings have grown more complicated. The town would never accept it." "Some won't," James agreed. "Others will come around. and those who don't can keep their distance from my property and my family. Family. The word resonated within Sarah like a bell. I need time to think, she whispered. Of course. James stood. Take all the time you need. But know that my offer stands regardless of your answer. You and Little Wolf have a place here for as long as you want it. He left her alone with her thoughts and the vast starlit sky above. Sarah closed her eyes, torn between hope and fear. Could she trust this man with her heart, with her son's future? Or would this end in rejection and heartbreak, as it had before? The next morning, Sarah was unusually quiet as she prepared breakfast. Little Wolf sensed her mood and watched her with concern. Are you sad, Mama? Sarah managed a smile. No, my son. Just thinking. About what? Before she could answer, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Sarah looked out the window to see Sheriff Davis and 2 other men riding toward the house. James emerged from the barn, striding to meet them. Sarah couldn't hear the conversation, but the sheriff's stern expression and James's increasingly rigid posture suggested trouble. Stay inside, Sarah instructed Little Wolf, her heart pounding as she stepped onto the porch. As she approached, she caught the tail end of the sheriff's words. Accusations of impropriety, Cooper. The town council is concerned. What I do on my own property is my business, James replied, his voice taut with anger. The sheriff noticed Sarah and nodded curtly. Mrs. Whitehawk, this concerns you as well. What's happened? Sarah asked, a familiar dread settling in her stomach. Received a wire from a Mr. Thomas Warren, the sheriff explained. Claims you abducted his son and fled. Says he's been searching for you for 2 years. The blood drained from Sarah's face. That's a lie. He abandoned us, left us with nothing. He tells a different story. Says he's on his way to collect his son. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Given the circumstances and the unusual nature of your living arrangement here, the town council feels it would be best if you moved into town until this is sorted out. She's not going anywhere. James stepped between Sarah and the sheriff. Thomas Warren is a liar and a coward who abandoned his family. If he shows his face here, he'll answer to me. The tension crackled between the men until the sheriff finally sighed. Have it your way, Cooper. But this won't end well if you keep bucking the town's sensibilities. He tipped his hat. Ma'am. As they rode away, Sarah felt her knees weaken. James caught her elbow, steadying her. He's found us, she whispered. After all this time. Listen to me, James said firmly. He has no claim on you or Little Wolf. Not anymore. The law recognizes abandonment, James interrupted. And I have friends in the territorial court who will listen to reason. His expression softened. But there is a simpler solution. Sarah met his eyes, understanding dawning. My offer stands, James said quietly. But now I'm asking not just for Little Wolf's sake, but for my own. These weeks with you both, they've changed me, Sarah. Brought life back to this empty house. From the doorway, a small voice called out, Mama. They turned to see Little Wolf watching them, his young face solemn with understanding beyond his years. Is my father coming to take me away? Sarah crossed to him, kneeling to meet his eyes. No, my son. No one will take you from me. Ever. Little Wolf looked past her to James. Can Mr. Cooper be my father instead? The simple question, asked with a child's directness, hung in the air between them all, a crossroads, a possibility, a future waiting to be claimed or rejected. The church in Pinewood was small but sturdy, its white clapboard exterior gleaming in the morning sun. Inside, only a handful of people occupied the pews, Hank and a few loyal ranch hands, the minister's wife, and surprisingly, Doc Miller and his family. Sarah stood at the back, wearing her best dress, a simple blue cotton that James had insisted on buying for her in town last week. Little Wolf stood beside her in new clothes, his hair neatly combed, fidgeting with excitement. Ready? James appeared at her side, dressed in a formal black suit that transformed him from rugged rancher to distinguished gentleman. Sarah took a deep breath. Are you certain this is what you want? There's still time to change your mind. James took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Minister Parker, despite initial reservations, conducted the service with genuine warmth. When James slipped a simple gold band onto Sarah's finger, his late wife's ring, offered with reverence and hope for a new beginning. She felt tears threatening. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Parker declared. "Mr. and Mrs. James Cooper." As they turned to face their small gathering of well-wishers, the church door burst open. Thomas Warren stood framed in the doorway, his face flushed with anger and the effects of whiskey. "This is a farce," he shouted, staggering forward. "That woman is still my wife." The peaceful moment shattered. Little Wolf pressed against Sarah's side, trembling. James stepped forward, placing himself between his new family and the intruder. "You're too late, Warren. You're interrupting a private ceremony." Thomas sneered, his once handsome face now bloated and marked with dissipation. "Private? Is that what you call stealing another man's wife and son?" "You abandoned them," James replied evenly. "Left them to fend for themselves while you drank away whatever conscience you might have had. The boy is mine. Indian squaw or not, she had my son, and I've come to claim what's mine." Thomas's gaze shifted to Little Wolf, who shrank further behind Sarah's skirts. "Little Wolf is my son now." James's voice was quiet but carried the unmistakable weight of a vow. Legally adopted as of yesterday, with the territorial judge's approval. Thomas lunged forward, but Sheriff Davis, who had slipped in behind him, caught his arm. "That's enough, Warren. You're drunk and making a fool of yourself." The sheriff nodded to James and Sarah. "Congratulations to you both. Now I suggest we take this outside and let these good people finish their celebration." As the sheriff escorted a protesting Thomas from the church, an uncomfortable silence fell over the small gathering. Then Doc Miller stepped forward, extending his hand to James. "Congratulations, Cooper, Mrs. Cooper." He nodded respectfully to Sarah. About time this town had something to celebrate. One by one, the others offered their good wishes. Not everyone in town would be so accepting, Sarah knew, but this small beginning meant more than she could express. Outside, they found Thomas handcuffed to the sheriff's hitching post, still shouting obscenities. "Take the side street," Sheriff Davis advised. "I'll handle this troublemaker." James nodded gratefully. "Appreciate it, Sheriff." As they walked toward their waiting wagon, Thomas called after them. "This isn't over. That boy has white blood. He belongs with his own kind." Little Wolf stopped, then turned and walked back until he stood before his former father. The boy's voice was clear and steady when he spoke. "My name is Joseph Little Wolf Cooper now. Mr. Cooper is my father. He teaches me things and doesn't yell at Mama. He doesn't go away." The 5-year-old's dignity silenced even Thomas. "I'm staying with them forever." With that, he rejoined Sarah and James, slipping his small hand into James's larger one with complete trust. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each of them processing the events of the day. When they crested the hill overlooking the Cooper property, their home now, truly, James stopped the wagon. "I want to say something to you both." He turned to face them, his expression solemn. "What happened today with Tom? I'm sorry you had to face that." "It wasn't your fault," Sarah said softly. "No, but it won't be the last time we face ugliness. There will be people in town, neighbors even, who won't accept our family." James looked at Little Wolf. "Some children at school might be cruel." Little Wolf nodded, his young face serious. "Because I'm half Apache? Because people fear what they don't understand." James echoed Sarah's earlier words. "But I want you both to know that I will always stand with you. This ranch, this home is ours together. No one can take that from us." Sarah felt tears well in her eyes. "I never thought I'd find this again. A place to belong." James reached across the wagon seat to take her hand. "You belong here. Both of you." He smiled at Little Wolf. "Now, I believe we have a wedding cake waiting at home. Race you to the house?" Little Wolf's face lit up. "Really? Really? Go on ahead with Scout. We'll be right behind you." As the boy ran down the hill, the border collie bounding at his heels, James turned to Sarah. "I know this began as an arrangement," he said quietly. "A solution to both our problems. But I need you to know that my feelings have grown into something much deeper." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "As have mine. It won't be easy. The town, Thomas. Nothing worthwhile ever is," Sarah replied. "But we'll face it together." James leaned forward, his kiss gentle but filled with promise. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers for a moment. "Together," he agreed. They continued down the hill toward the ranch house, where Little Wolf was already waiting on the porch, waving excitedly. The afternoon sun gilded the landscape, casting long shadows across what was now their shared land. Inside, they found that Hank and the others had prepared a small celebration. A cake sat on the kitchen table, slightly lopsided but made with obvious care. Presents wrapped in brown paper and string were stacked beside it. Practical gifts from practical people, but offered with genuine goodwill. As evening fell, their few guests departed, leaving the new family alone in their home. Little Wolf, exhausted from the excitement, fell asleep on the settee in the parlor. "I should put him to bed," Sarah said, rising from her chair. James stopped her with a gentle hand. "Let me." She watched as he carefully lifted the sleeping child, cradling him with a tenderness that made her heart ache. This strong man who had opened his home and his heart to them both. Later, as they stood on the porch watching the stars emerge, James wrapped an arm around Sarah's shoulders. "I received a letter from my son yesterday," he said quietly. Sarah looked up, surprised. "David? What did he say?" "He's coming for a visit, next month." James smiled. "Says he wants to meet his new stepmother and brother." "Really? After all this time?" James nodded. "I wrote to him about you and Little Wolf. Told him how you've both changed my life." His voice grew husky. "How this house became a home again." Sarah leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him against her. "Thank you for finding us that day in town." "No," James said softly, looking out over the land that now belonged to all of them. "Thank you for bringing life back to this old rancher's heart." In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely cry echoing across the valley. But here, on this porch, with the man who had become her husband, and the son sleeping peacefully inside, Sarah Whitehawk Cooper was no longer alone. The challenges would come, Thomas's threats, the town's prejudices, the hard work of ranching in this unforgiving territory. But for the first time in years, Sarah faced the future without fear. She had found her place, her home, her family, and that was worth fighting for.